You might actually be the most derivative one of all. I mean, Christ, the same house.
Maybe so, but you forgot the first rule of surviving a stab movie. Never answer the...
I'm bored.
Wait!
And welcome back to Horror Queer's YouTube.
I'm Trace.
Oh, fine. You want to be formal. I'm Joe.
Yes. Hello, everyone. We are coming to you with a special listener question. And honestly, it got us thinking. So we were like, why don't we just do a YouTube episode on it and kind of expand this out?
Yeah, so folks, we heard from Shaun, and he wrote to us, I will shortly be spending some time with my mother for a prolonged period. She really wants to bond with me and has been gracious enough to offer to watch a horror movie or two during this time, which I think is really sweet.
Mm-hmm.
She is a kindergarten teacher who hates horror movies or being scared at all. In her words, why would I watch something that makes me anxious the whole time when I can watch something that makes me laugh and smile instead? And folks, I feel like I have heard that a million times when it comes to horror films. So, Shaun, I feel you.
Yeah.
So, Shaun's question to us then is, what are some horror movies that you recommend I show to my non-horror loving mother that you think she would enjoy? And he does make a note that nothing is off limits because he and his mother have watched a ton of awkward movie moments, such as The Hangover, Black Swan, and The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.
I'm really glad that it's like, hey, I don't care about being like watching awkward things with my mother. That's not the issue. The issue is she doesn't want to be scared or be anxious.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So Trace, we each came up with a couple of recommendations, but I'm curious, how did you curate your list?
It was a thing where I was like, okay, I guess I'll go for specific films. And then I started thinking about films that I did specifically with my mother. Because my mother, I've talked about the podcast before, is not a super horror fan. That's definitely more my dad's area of things. But she will watch some things with us. Like she definitely took my sister and I to go see Blade Trinity when it was in theaters back in whenever that was.
Early 2000s.
Yeah, the early 2000s. And so I just thought about that because even though I don't know Shaun's mother, it sounds like his mother and my mother might be on the same wavelength. But even as I was going through specific movies, I was like, well, shit, a lot of these have kind of like, they kind of fall into the same general wheelhouse of type of horror film, type of genre film.
Right.
So then I kind of did 3 different categories of films, and then with a couple like films in each category.
Okay, interesting. So Shaun also provided us with a kind of March Madness style grid of different films that he could show his mother or maybe show his mother in order. So I did kind of draw a little bit of inspiration from things he was already thinking about when I was looking at my picks, but also I used to curate a movie marathon on Halloween and Christmas for folks, and I didn't have any horror friends. So it was always a strategic, like, how do you get people to buy in initially? And then how do you kind of ramp them up as they are either being held prisoner by you in your house, or as you say, okay, you managed to handle that one well. So now we graduate you to this title.
Right. You're testing the waters, the pH test or whatever.
Yeah, your horror pH test.
My first pick. So the category for this that I did, I'm calling this very safe horror. And these are films like The Conjuring or The Others or What Lies Beneath. I even put The Invitation in this category or something like The Invisible Man or Hush. It's a lot of women in danger.
Right. Yeah.
But it's not like, it's a lot of horror that's built on suspense and tension, or maybe like more classy scares, just something that's not really too offensive. But I wanted to distinguish here though, because my mother is not really into things that aren't realistic. So like, I remember she went to go see The Ring with us, like back in 2002, and she didn't like it because she didn't think it was scary, and she was like, "This, like, it was too out there for her, like the concept of a haunted videotape and like just horror rules and logistics." But you'll notice I have I have The Conjuring in there. I have What Lies Beneath. It's still a ghost story, but it's not the same thing.
Right. And I would argue that they're also gently religious horror. So knowing your mother, her background, that's something where she's already kind of believing in some of that stuff. So I think a horror take on it is probably a bit more in her wheelhouse.
Yeah, but even something like Hush, which is like, I mean, again, like it's a horror movie, but it's, you have like one or two kills in there, but it's very much more of oh God, I hate that I'm saying this. It's more of a thriller than a horror film.
I think that there's a reason why we use subgenres as labels, and it's because it helps to inform people it's a horror film, but it can also be this angle of a horror film. So I think thriller is still a very useful term. It's just when people say, oh, if it's a thriller, it's not a horror film. You're like, no, thriller is a subgenre of horror.
Yeah, and I also, I mean, like, what lies beneath an easy sell is like, hey, mom, there's a horror movie that Michelle Pfeiffer's doing right now, or if
Yes.
Nicole Kidman's in this ghost movie right now, come go see this with me. Like, that makes it an easier sell than just some like a list of no names, which is unfortunate, but it works.
Yeah, I mean, sell Mom on Bird Box because it's got the Sandy B star power. Yeah,
Absolutely.
makes sense. So, my easy recommendation to get people hooked on horror, I've long said this. I think that when people think of horror, they often think of slashers, and specifically more like 80 slashers, where they're dumb, they're stupid, the character development isn't there. It's just some guy stalking women and it's misogynistic. So, I think it's helpful to branch out what people's definition of horror typically is. And I find the best way to get the horror averse in is to go with comedy. So, obviously your mileage is going to vary based on how people find comedy. Like I'm particular with my brand of comedy, but I went with something like Cabin in the Woods because it's got that meta horror comedy. So it's a little bit funny. It's wink, wink, self-referential, which I think the audience can appreciate, but it's also sort of cueing the audience members. There's a bunch of different types of horror, so you can watch how people react. And it's like, oh, if they get intrigued by the Pinhead lookalike, maybe Hellraiser is down the line in the future.
That's really interesting. See, I think I've shown my mom Cabin in the Woods. I don't think she disliked it, but growing up, my mom didn't like. My dad didn't like the side, but what they deemed silly movies. So like we weren't allowed to watch like Ace Ventura growing up. Like it was too silly. It was stupid humor. And I find more often than not when I show something that mixes horror and comedy, that blending of tones kind of it enters that silly or stupid territory for them. Like I would never show my mom Evil Dead 2, you know?
Oh, I see. Interesting. I hadn't really thought of that. I was thinking a little bit more of people kind of my age. I was fixating primarily on the idea that people might find the comedy easier to latch onto, and then they're suddenly realizing, oh, there's also scares and death and gore and that kind of stuff.
For sure, no, it's just a lighter, it's a good gateway, if you will, into a hardcore horror.
A gateway to hardcore. Oh my god. Okay, so what's your next one then?
Well, my next one honestly is very similar to yours. Again, it's so funny because some of these have comedy in them, but I did like fun horror, and so something like Your Next, something like Scream, Ready or Not, Better Watch Out. And I think maybe things like Better Watch Out or Ready or Not have more like straightforward comedy in them, but I don't think it's a hard tone to juggle. And again, Cabin in the Woods is the kind of the same way. I guess with me with Cabin in the Woods, though, it's like I feel like showing someone that if they don't already know a lot of the horror genre, like they might enjoy it, but they're gonna miss so much of what makes that movie so special.
Yes, no, that is true. But it could be one of those things where you start with it, and then as they get more comfortable with it, you can circle back and say, now you understand more of the jokes.
Absolutely. But no, I mean, even with Scream, like I remember I would have been 7 years old when Scream came out. And I remember my mom came to pick me up from my grandma's house, and my grandparents were like, oh, how was the movie? And she was like, oh, my husband took me to go see it because Drew Barrymore was in it and she dies in the first 10 minutes. She was so frustrated.
Okay, so that's a caveat to your first point then. If you're going to sell it with star power, you have to be careful about how much the star is actually present.
Which, to be fair, no one would have known that.
No one would have known. No, not opening weekend.
But I think now, I mean, like, I definitely show my parents all the Scream movies. So, I mean, like, and she quite enjoyed Scream 6. So,
oh, interesting. Yeah, I actually feel like a lot of Wes Craven films would be good gateway entries because he's not only diverse, but he does things that are a little bit more cerebral, a little bit more intellectual. Like he's a very smart filmmaker in that way. So even something like, I think, Nightmare on Elm Street, especially nowadays where you look at it and you might be able to get away with saying, oh, some of the special effects are a little dated, so it's not quite as scary, but it's still a very clever horror film.
Absolutely. So, yeah, what is your next pick?
if you can't go with the comedy horror, one way of getting people in is creature features. So it's a different kind of subgenre that you can sell people on. So my perfect combination that I found worked really well for folks is something like Night of the Creeps or Black Sheep, which is the New Zealand film where the sheep go rabid and they start attacking and killing people, because they're both very over the top. But I think even if you wanted to go more straightforward creature feature, there's a prestige value in the very first blockbuster trace, which is something like Jaws from 1975. So it's hard for people who don't like horror. Like, I don't think they're thinking of Jaws when they say they don't like it, but Jaws is a properly scary film. And then you could always follow that up with a double bill of something like Deep Blue Sea, which is, ooh, let's see how aquatic horror has evolved.
I love that we have both focused on two very different parts of this question. You have focused on the non-horror loving aspect, and I have focused on the mother aspect.
There we go. You know what? Maybe we'll meet in the middle.
Maybe we'll meet in the middle. Yeah, because here's the thing. I would never show my mom any of these movies.
Really? Okay.
Creature features, it's too far out of the realm of reality. It's not even that it's silly, although, again, a lot of creature features are silly. Although I think I showed my mom Crawl, and I think she was fine with Crawl. Right. But that's also because she had like the daughter-father relationship to really latch onto. This will play a part in my final pick, by the way. Okay. But like Deep Blue Sea, it's kind of like it's just a bunch of scientists getting picked up by sharks. I love Deep Blue Sea, but it's not really a mom movie for me.
Okay. What about Jaws? Do you think your mom would have liked Jaws?
She's definitely seen Jaws. I think she saw it in theaters back in 75 too. She would have been 15 at the time. But I mean, like, has she seen all the sequels? I doubt it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, had I seen any of the sequels until this year? No.
Well, you had a bad childhood because I definitely saw all those sequels.
All right. Well, what's your third pick then?
I intentionally picked this. We did talk about this in our Patreon episode on this film back in 2020, I think is when it was. This is less so a category of films, but I did the Last House on the Left remake. And
oh my God, what?
I got this Blu-ray like Christmas of 2009, and I made my whole family, me, my dad, my mom, and my sister, all sat around the TV and watched the remake of Last House on the Left. And
it was the unrated smile on your face, like mischievous shit-eating grin right now. I made my whole family.
Well, and it's the unrated cut too, so like that rape scene is like longer in the unrated cut. So I mean, yes, but here's the thing though. I wasn't expecting my mom to like this movie. The credits roll and she goes, "Nice, see, that's a movie that I can really get into because it has a nice emotional component where it really makes you feel for these characters." And I was like,
okay.
Okay.
So something where relationships are at the forefront, they're a priority for the film. So even if the plot around them is ludicrous or something like that, there's a basic humanity to latch onto.
Yeah, I mean, I think, just the idea, maybe it could be as simple as it's a revenge story. That's easy to latch onto. Or it could be that it's parents protecting their children. That's maybe something else that she really latched onto. But I mean, again, big surprise. I tell people that anecdote all the time because when people are like bitching about rape revenge, I'm like, well, my mom really liked The Last House on the Left remake. I wouldn't show her the first one, though, because I just think it's too...
well, that's a harder sell.
It's, I mean, like, both in content and in production.
Yeah. So ironically enough, my last pick is a little bit more similar to your first category of picks. So I ended up latching on to Shaun's mention of not just star power, but also David Fincher specifically. So if we're talking about Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, if we're talking about Black Swan, I thought, well, why not just go for something that clearly works for your mother, which might be something like Gone Girl. So I think thrillers are a bit of an easier sell, particularly to women of a certain age. This one's got an Academy Award nominated performance. It's got Ben Affleck. So like it is star power. It's got David Fincher.
Okay, so like then like kind of parlaying over here, what about Seven? Would you show your mother Seven or a non-horror fan Seven? Because I don't think it's a scary film, but it's a very like nihilistic, like upsetting film.
To be honest, I would go with Zodiac before I did Seven.
See, I would struggle with the 3-hour runtime for Zodiac.
Well, there is that too. I mean, like, hey, maybe if you're sitting down spending a lot of time with mom, you've got 3 hours that you want to kill.
3 hours.
All right, mom, buckle up. Here we go.
I'm pretty sure my husband has shown his mom Zodiac before because it's one of his favorite movies. She came to visit us for a while, and she will watch anything horror, but she really hates explicit gore. So we showed her Terrifier 2, and she could not do Terrifier 2.
No.
But we've shown her some really upsetting things that just weren't gory, and she was totally fine with all those.
Oh, see, that is interesting. I mean, I think if nothing else, Shaun's question is really helpful in illustrating you can't just make recommendations to people willy-nilly. Like, I don't know if you've ever found this trace, but people say, oh, tell me what your favorite scary movie is. You know, maybe it's something I like. And you're just like, no, I've got 10 additional questions I need to ask you. Like, do you like this movie? Do you not like this type? And like, what's your gore level? Do you like comedy? All these different kinds of things. And I think Shaun was really smart in giving us like, here's things we've already watched. Here's some of the things that she does and doesn't like. And I think that those are the kinds of things you really need to follow up with on people when you're making recommendations.
Right. Absolutely. And I think it's really specific to the horror genre too, because I mean, look, if someone's like, oh, what dramas do you like? And like, do you have a lot of follow-up questions? I guess maybe comedies might have the same
like
thing.
3 or 4.
Maybe 3 or 4, but not 10.
No. Break out the questionnaire.
Yeah, but no, listeners, let us know. Listeners and viewers, I forgot we're on YouTube now. Yeah, let us know what are things that you would show your mother that you have shown your mother. Give us some success stories and give us some failure stories.
Yes. Ooh, I do love to hear a failure story, particularly because they're often quite epic. Like, we tried to watch this, and this is how it didn't go well.
Did not work. But yeah. So yeah, thank you for that, Shaun. That was a real fun question to answer. And until our next listener question pick, we can cross out this YouTube minisode.
Indeed. And cross out horror queers.